Hi, I'm Anthony Chapman and I'm a tutor at Point Blank. In my career I've worked with bands including Franz Ferdinand, Rizzle Kicks and Klaxons. The following video shows you the type of content you can expect on our Mixing Dance Music in Ableton course. Hope to see you in class soon.
So in the second part of this video, let's start by taking a look at our synths and other melodic elements. And other than the bass line, really the most important melodic element of the track is this track called Bleep Riff. So this is the track here. And what I want to do first is just talk you through what I've done in terms of processing. So if we take a look here at the EQ, you can see I've done what sometimes gets called a bracket EQ, where I've taken off some of the really low frequencies and some of the really high frequencies. If I bypass this EQ, it's a little bit distorted at the very top. And there are some slightly troublesome, really low frequencies there. So I've basically tried to chop off some of the troublesome frequencies at the bottom, the really high frequencies which are carrying that distortion, and I've boosted the mid-range a little bit. Very broad boost. I always tend to go broad boost and narrow cut. That usually works a lot better. If you try to boost with a really narrow Q, you'll usually get quite an unnatural sounding result. So that's the EQ I've done before going into the glue compressor, and you can see I've left the attack, the release and the ratio at the default settings, as that seems to work quite well. It's compressing fairly hard. It's just keeping everything under control, and it just seems to work with that fairly hard compression. It's only compressing by about 4 dB, but it's fairly quick. I didn't actually end up adding any makeup. It seemed to sit okay in the mix, so I just decided to leave that where it is. Now, where it gets interesting here is what I've done in terms of automation on the effects. You can see this red line, which is the send for the slap delay, which is coming back on return D. And so this is a really short delay, just 1 or 2 repeats. But what I've done here is we've got this long main section of this bleep riff, but I just felt that there's other elements like the bass and some of the other elements have got some movement in where Debucus has manually changed some of the settings. So I wanted to introduce some automation of my own, because otherwise this sound is pretty static. I've got the send for the slap coming up. If we skip along to here, so as we go up, you'll see there's certain points where it jumps up, like here. And we can just start to hear it coming through, and by the time we get to this one, it's really noticeable when it turns up. So you can hear that little repeat on it. And it's building up and building up and building up. And then whoop, starts to go back down. And it dives back down there to the point where when we get to about here, then it's really noticeable at all times in the mix. If we listen to it in context. And then down, and then it'll just start to fade back down again, the send. So remember, I'm not changing the level of this actual riff, I'm just altering the amount of it that's being sent to my slap delay. So that's the main other melodic element, but then all the rest of the synth tracks are what I would probably call quite bitty. There are lots of little sounds that sort of pop up now and again. So let's just have a quick look at them and take a look at some of the techniques I've used on them. Now this screech sound here, I haven't actually done anything in terms of EQ or compression or anything like that, because if we listen to it, it's quite it's kind of like ready. It doesn't really need anything changing on it, and it seems to fit in the mix perfectly. And what I've done is I've used this send C to send it to a long reverb. So I've got this reverb and I'm using this on quite a lot of tracks. And this is just the standard Ableton Live reverb device. I've turned up the pre-delay a bit to about 40 milliseconds because I do like to push the reverb away from the attack of the sounds that I'm feeding into it. And it's got quite a long decay there, 2.5 seconds. But I've also cut some of the high frequencies on the input so that everything that comes in is going to just get, the high frequencies are just going to get calmed down a bit. One thing you might notice that I've done here is I've put a utility plugin before it. And this is a little tip from me. Basically, I find that the Ableton Reverb device is quite quiet for some reason. I always really struggle with the levels coming out of it. And sometimes I don't really like turning up the fader past the 0 level. So I find that using this utility plugin really helps with that. Just make the level of everything going into the reverb a bit higher. I also think that the reverb responds a little bit better with a nice, relatively hot level coming into it as well. So you'll also notice that I've panned this. I've got some automation here. Let's open this up. So panning from the left over to the right. And then I copied that for the other times that sound is in. So we got another one here, and I just literally just copied that automation across, so it did the same thing. Now this Synth Bits track, this is literally, I think there's like 3 or 4 different sounds in this track. So if you just quick listen. So it's got that little percussive thing, then some little beeps, and then we've also got so we've got kind of 3 or 4 different sounds in there, and rather than splitting it up into separate tracks, which you could do, I just decided to live with it as it is because I think they all sound good. There's obviously a bit of processing gone on when the sounds have been created, and then I've just got the glue compressor on there running a little bit faster than most of my other instances of it, and that just keeps everything under control. And then in terms of effects, we've got on this Send A here, I'm using a convolution reverb. This is a Max for Live device, and this is a sample of a real plate reverb. We can see there it's called the UEMT250, so I'm going to guess this is a EMT250 plate, which is a classic plate reverb. And also you'll notice I've got a compressor on the way into that. I was just finding that if I compress the input to the reverb, everything was sounding a little bit sweeter, everything was evened out a little bit. Lots of my tracks in this mix are using this reverb. This is a general ambience for the track. I've got quite a few of my drum tracks going in there, the vocals, all sorts. And then I'm also using the long reverb that we talked about. So I'm blending 2 reverbs there, which I do quite a lot. And then I've also got on Send E, if we move down to this synth chord hit track here, on Send E, let's just have a listen to this. On Send E here, I've got this track called Beat Echo. Now if you listen, you can hear that. It's set to a beat, so basically it's just echoing every beat. It's synced to the tempo of the track. And what's happening here is, when the sound is entering the delay, this compressor at the end is sidechained from the send that is feeding the delay. And when signal comes in, it compresses very hard to suppress the signal. And the idea here is that when the sound is actually playing, we're not really hearing the echo, but as the sound eases off, then we hear the tails of the echo. So just have a listen more closely. I'll turn it up a bit. So basically the tail is really only audible once the sound feeding the delay has actually stopped. This is something I use a lot because if you've got lots and lots of repeats happening on the echo, your track can get very confused and very messy. Let's take a look at this synth chord riff, which happens a few times in the track. Again, I've used a bit of automation here to feed the multi-tap. So as the track goes along, we've got more and more of it going into the multi-tap. Yeah, it's really starting to build up now. And then it fades back down again. So I just wanted to do that to add a bit of an evolving quality to the sound. And in terms of processing this sound, I did quite a bit more than on some of the other synth sounds, because this is quite a crucial element of the track for me. It's a really nice melodic element. It's got a nice harmony to it as well. So I did some compression at the front because I just thought it needed calming down a little bit, because I really wanted to get it up there in the mix. Then my EQ, I've rolled off some of these really low frequencies. There were a few things going on down there. Got a bit of a cut here at, what are we talking about, 260 hertz or thereabouts. So that's with it off, and then on. So it was just a bit of a muddy frequency there. Then if we go higher up, I've just done a general brightening up as it goes on, because I just really felt like that sound needed to be quite crisp. And I actually eventually employed the Lufticus EQ to give it even more brightening. It just seemed to really need it for me. If I turn that off and then back on, so I just felt like those frequencies needed to cut through. Then at the end, I've got my trusty side chain from the kick drum, just to give it a bit of a bounce and to get it out of the way of the bass drum.